how's it going? I thought that this time for this kind of video, I wanted to go off script for a change. It's not something I usually do for games where I usually find it much easier to just type everything up and then record it through audio. That way I can articulate all of my thoughts and feelings, my points, but I thought this time I wanted to just go off the dome, like a freestyle rapper, but without any of the rhyming whatsoever. Anyway, so let's backtrack a bit. Throughout the month of January, I had this lightning strike idea about wanting to go through as many Sonic games as possible. I've played Sonic on and off in the past, but never to this degree where I made a conscious effort to go through one title and the next. And the game for this year that sort of kickstarted this interest was playing Sonic Mania. That is a game that is a compilation of the first 3 games all bundled into one, and it is one of the best examples of a fan project that got an official status to then be turned into an official game that you can now buy. For those that loved the 2D era of the Sonic games more so than the 3D ones, this game is an absolute love letter to that particular era. For those that grew up with the Genesis or even the CD and throughout most of the 90s where, you had a plethora of 2D platformers. Sonic Mania is a celebration of the old Sonic. And that game basically kickstarted this sudden desire to now play through the other Sonic games and see what they had to offer on the table. And I even went back to the first 3 Sonic games to see how they held up. Something about this franchise just clicked in a way that I haven't really felt for a very long time with all of the other games and franchises that I've immersed myself into. Sonic is also an era where you had these iconic mascot-like characters that had these very elegant, friendly designs to them that you would immediately recognize the moment you saw them. You look at Bomberman or Earthworm Jim or Mario or even Boogerman, for instance, and a plethora of other characters that exist around this time. And Sonic was a part of that era too. And to this very day, his design has been pretty consistent across the board, where it's never really changed that much, mind you, there being a few variations in between depending on the title we're talking about, but in general, he's always been blue, he's always been fast, he's always had this rush, go, attitude, and it's also reflected when you're idle in the first game or in the trilogy games, where if you stop him for a moment, he'll be tapping his feet and he'll be looking directly at you, basically saying, hurry up, we need to get moving. Sonic is all about that, just wanting to not waste time, wanting to just do the right thing, go ahead, not give up. All of that is relatable. All of that is just good feeling stuff that any gamer could relate to. And playing these Sonic games reminded me also that games don't have to always go beyond their medium. They don't have to become, pieces of cinema or pieces of art. They can just simply be a source of entertainment that just allows you to interact with its own digital world and its own logic and its own rules. And there's a lot of things that, you can find in Sonic where even in the worst Sonic games, you can always find something good in it. Like for instance, in Sonic 06, that is a game that has a lot of problems, and I mean a lot of problems, but it's always had a really good soundtrack, and the theme song really hits hard when you're lifting some heavy stuff in the gym or you're pulling all of your body weight up for the first time. Stuff like that is just hype, and Sonic has always been full of hype music and, just hype in general, with the sense of speed, the sense of momentum, the amount of exploration and freedom that you can ascertain in each of the levels. The realization that you can go fast is a feeling that Sonic does really, really well and still does, especially in some of the newer titles that I've heard really good things about, like in Shadow X Generations, which I've heard nothing but good things about, and I definitely want to pick that up at some point. But with what I've got currently, I'm just bouncing through whatever Sonic games that I have available to me, and one of those titles is Sonic R. Sonic R is both a platformer and a racing game. At least that's what I've gathered when I was playing through it. It takes elements of Sonic's ability to traverse multiple layers of like the level, where, you know, you can go from under and above or in the middle of the level in the terrain. And all of that is concentrated in a racing-based environment where you have laps that you can partake in, and, you know, you can travel through the main road or go through shortcuts, what have you. It's like if you had Mario Kart's race courses, but then you had all of these different shortcuts that you can suddenly go through and jump over or go under. Stuff like that is what I think Sonic R was trying to go for, where they wanted to create a racing-like experience, but still maintain Sonic's movement and platforming-based gameplay. And this was also at a time where 3D was still a relatively new thing. It was still cutting edge. There were massive differences between the 32-bit and the 16-bit era of gaming, and the Sega Saturn was a console that showed a lot of its potential, contrary to its failures and its underdeveloped titles. It was also a console that had some pretty complicated hardware that not every developer utilized. And in Sonic R, I can't really say for certain how much of that hardware was utilized for this game, but what I do know for certain is that it is ultimately an undercooked title. An undercooked title that still ended up being really good in some departments. It's a game that has, you know, a good roster of characters, albeit small, a very small pool of maps that are pretty nice in their aesthetics. You know, they each differ from one another. And the music, oh my god, the music. This game, if it has one perfect factor that redeems it in a lot of ways, it's definitely the music. Like I already said earlier, some of the worst Sonic games generally always make up for it in the music department, and for me, Sonic R definitely fits into that category. Hell, for some people, it's the main reason why they play Sonic R, just to listen to the music and vibe with the tracks. You can go into the main, like, you know, free running time attack mode and just simply roam around the maps and just vibe with all of the existing tracks assigned to each map. The soundtrack for Sonic R was composed by Edgehog and voiced or vocaled by Teresa Jane Davis. Both people come together to make a somewhat cheesy but just really fun to listen to music that really gets you into that sort of racing mood. And when I was listening to a lot of the soundtrack, I also was thinking of another game in particular called Ridge Racer Type 4, which also had an amazing soundtrack that really fit the mood for Ridge Racer's aesthetic and also the tracks that you would race in. Sonic R benefits from that same feeling, just like Ridge Racer Type 4 does with its own music. Music can make or break a racing experience sometimes, and sometimes it can be that one redeeming factor in a game that, you know, could have had more potential to be a lot better if it was given more time of the day, if it was given a bigger development cycle, or if just more was added to it, you know, in terms of its content pool. And Sonic R is one of those cases, like I said, where it's a game that had promise but was ultimately just undercooked, and undercooked is one of the best ways I can describe this game. It's a game that I enjoyed a lot more than I expected, contrary to what a lot of people in the community say. And believe me, this is one of the more divisive titles too. Each track hits hard in each map, and each map gels well with the music in hand. So you have Resort Island, Radical City, Regal Ruin, Reactor Factory, and then when you do those 4 maps, then you have a final one called Radiant Emerald. All 5 maps get gradually more complex, and because of the limited pool of maps, you're going to be playing on them often, and because of the short pool of maps, as well as the roster of characters, you're going to get through this fairly quickly if you stick with it, and it's clunky and annoying controls from time to time. I don't necessarily have a favorite map per se, but I do like that old 90s 3D aesthetic that it has going for it. Like as if you're watching something straight from the 90s, you know, with its like pre-rendered backgrounds or its very low poly, you know, textures or, you know, objects. And the Sonic characters in this game have that 3D low poly aesthetic where their designs are still pretty faithful even to their 2D counterparts, which have aged a lot better in comparison to, say, this. However, with each of the maps, they all gel pretty well together in my opinion. And the thing with Sonic R is that like I may have said about the game already, is that there is always that room for growth and improvement, just like in the other Sonic games, where each map has this puzzle element to it as well. I know that's a bit reaching, especially for a game like this, but what I mean is that the routes present opportunities to clear the races quicker, and in some cases you can utilize these shortcuts to also get some of the other goals that you have to obtain during a race. Like for example, each map has Chaos Emeralds that you can collect, and if you get all of the Chaos Emeralds in all 4 maps, then you unlock Supersonic, who is one of the fastest characters, if not the fastest character in the game. Then you also have the 5 coins in each map that are located in different spots, and sometimes they're not always out in the open, but hidden in another shortcut. If you collect all 5 coins and reach one of the top 3 positions in the race, then you get an opportunity to race an opponent that you haven't unlocked yet. Losing this race means you have to repeat the whole process again, but winning the race unlocks you that character that you win. And the other characters include Metal Sonic, Dull Tails, Metal Knuckles, and Robotnik. Anyways, so that's kind of the progression of the game. You go through all 4 maps, you collect all these items, you unlock Supersonic, you unlock the other opponents, and then you do the final race, and then the game ends. That's it. So where do you go from here then? Well, after you've done with this, you just have the, multiplayer mode. That is, if you have another friend who's willing to play this with you, you have another controller, you can do split screen. And if they pick Supersonic, then your chances of winning are very low, unless they don't know how to use him. Because he is a very fast character, and with the way this game handles, it's very easy to lose control quickly, and God forbid if you hit a wall facing direct forward, it takes an absolute eternity to turn around. So each of the characters have some of their abilities, like for instance with Tails, he can fly, Knuckles, he can glide, Sonic, he can jump up high. All 3 characters for me handled quite well, and Knuckles, I think, is a pretty well-rounded character to use overall because, he has good speed just like the other 2. He can also jump and he can also glide. That gives him a lot more verticality compared to some of the other characters where if you do high jumps, you can glide for long periods of time, ignoring certain parts of the race course entirely, which also can give you opportunities to make unique shortcuts that maybe the other characters wouldn't be able to make. And outside of the selection of Hedgehog races and also the metal variants, you also have Robotnik and Amy. What makes these 2 unique to the others is that they don't have the same mobility and verticality as the other ones do. They are limited to vehicles, as if you were driving in a car or a cart. Now with Amy, she has the ability to boost up with acceleration, but you have to also do it in a straight line where you can go past opponents. With Dr. Robotnik, he can shoot rockets towards other opponents that lock in onto them. However, these missiles are absolutely useless. No matter how many times you shoot at them, it doesn't really deter them much from, catching up to you anyways. And in the case of Amy, all it took for me was 1 race to try her out, and I was like, yeah, nah, this isn't cutting it out for me. I'm just going to play a different character instead and just, have more fun doing that than using her. So yeah, using those 2 as well as Egg Robo, that's what he's called. Right. The other characters, including the metal versions and Supersonic, they are more fun to use than the other ones. The other 2 are just kind of like, hey, I want to have more of a challenge than what is already in the game. And, maybe if you're a big fan of Amy or a big fan of Robotnik, you may be more inclined to try them out. Just like how some people are Bowser fans, which leads to them using Bowser in Mario Kart. Although they have their advantages and disadvantages, they are still somewhat usable, and in Sonic R, those characters are also somewhat usable. I just didn't enjoy using them that much. So that's why I just stuck with the Triple Trouble cast of characters like Sonic and Knuckles and Tails. And also the metal variants, which were also fun to use and a bit different to the Hedgehog versions. So yeah, there's that. You have a roster of characters that all feel pretty unique to use. They have their advantages and their disadvantages, and because of the way they play differently in terms of their abilities, this also makes it so they have unique ways of creating their own routes or developing their own momentum that others wouldn't be able to do to the same degree. That is kind of what I liked about their whole idea of making a racing game that was like a mix of platforming and racing, where they try to keep as much of the 3D platforming of Sonic as possible while also creating a racing experience. And it's a shame that they didn't return to this idea too, and I know that they've done other Sonic racing games, but they're more in the vein of Mario Kart than say what this game tries to do. However, in saying that, the controls are going to be the biggest hurdle, especially for when I was trying it out and I didn't have access to the analog stick. The D-pad in this game is a pain in the ass. Turning always feels like you're on ice, and when you stop, it takes an eternity to turn around. And another thing too, when you hit the walls from the sides, you don't really lose as much momentum as you would expect, because there were times where in, say, Radical City, I was just sliding along the walls and still maintaining a good amount of speed. And this made it annoying to try and get all the coins because of how tricky the movement is in this game. But I know that through a lot of time and effort, as I get more comfortable with the turning and the stopping, I know that eventually these issues would eventually subside. But it's important to recognize that these issues are going to be pretty significant when you first start, because this is a game that is a bit of a hurdle to get into. And a lot of people in the Sonic community have also commented on the game's handling system. It's just pretty janky when you think about it. But as bad as it is in some departments, again, the charm of it, the low poly aesthetics, the great music that has going for it, it's all just kind of there. It's one of those games where, you know, you just end up liking it anyways for different reasons. It's not necessarily the best, far from it, but it's a game that is at the very least enjoyable. And at the very least, it has a unique approach to the racing genre. And I actually wouldn't mind seeing more racing games incorporate more platforming, you know, race courses, or, you know, platforming mechanics, or even just something like what this game is. There's not a lot on the surface, and there's not a lot underneath the roof. You know, you have 5 maps, you have a very small roster of characters, especially in comparison to, say, later Sonic racing titles. And at the end of the day, if you're looking for a rich experience, this isn't necessarily it. But it's a game that I was curious enough to try, and I'm glad that I did try it out, because I felt like it was an important game to at least check out in my Sonic journey, where I wanted to go through some of the best and maybe some of the worst games. I have plans to try out some of the other ones that are also somewhat infamous. Two in particular, Sonic 06 and Shadow the Hedgehog, which are contested titles. Even 06 has people that unironically like the game. And yes, I know that Project 06 is a thing, but as far as I know, it's not finished. So I'm going to just play the original and suffer through that instead. Just like how I suffered through Sonic R and still somehow came out to enjoy it. And I don't know if I'm going to like 06. There's a high probability that I won't, but you know what? Screw it. I just want to go for a ride and just see where it goes, you know? And when I look at something like, say, 06, or when I look at something like even this game, they remind me of some of my favorite eras in gaming. You know, Sonic R's 32-bit era and Sonic 06's early 360 PS3 launch era, where you had this birth of a new day feeling with all of these new games that were coming out of the woodwork. Like when I would read the K-Zone magazines, I would see glimpses of these, you know, games that I never saw before on these new consoles I never played before, like in, you know, seeing the launch title images for Need for Speed Most Wanted or Condemned Criminal Origins or Dead Rising. I was excited. Now, I didn't know of Sonic 06 back then, but over the years I would come to eventually know it, and I would also come to know its infamy. And very, very soon, I'm going to become acquainted with that game's infamy and see it for what it is. But in any event, Sonic R is a game that I'm glad that I gave a try. There's not a great deal I can really say about it other than what I've already said. And like I said earlier, I wanted to come off of this with more of an off-script feel and just sort of talk more honestly about the game and how I felt throughout it and through to its end. Also, the handling sucks. It just sucks. And yet somehow, once you get a handle of it, it's somehow not too bad, but still being pretty bad. The music makes up for it in some cases. There are times where I'm willing to just have a go of the game anyways. Hey, let's play some Sonic R. You know, it's like with some other games that I know are kind of bad, but are still somehow enjoyable. And there are some irredeemably bad games that I've played, and Sonic R isn't necessarily irredeemably bad. It's just a bad game that has some redeeming qualities that miraculously make me come back to it somehow. So yeah, that's Sonic R. It's a game that is a part of my ongoing Sonic Chronicle. And yes, I'm avoiding the Sonic Twitter pages, like just how you would avoid the Abyss in Dark Souls without the Artorias ring. That is a whole minefield that I do not want to explore. And I've heard things about the fandom, not all of it, but some of it. I'm not going to make that a part of my journey, don't worry. I'm not going to be coming at everyone with a fan-made Sonic art that you would find on DeviantArt, don't worry. Anyway, so Sonic R is done. I played through it, and I know that there is a PC version as well that has some other features, including weather conditions. And I heard that there's even a mod that changes up some of the maps. Like when I looked at, say, Resort Islands for some gameplay for someone else's video, I saw that the textures were changed to look more like Green Hill Zone. And I thought, hey, this looks sick. Imagine if Sonic R looked more like this than what we got on the Saturn. Wouldn't that have been interesting? Well, just for the sake of curiosity, just go check this game out anyways. I'm not necessarily going to say don't play it, but I'm going to say at least look at it. You know, it's an example of how a game can have potential and how it can ultimately disappoint and come out undercooked and yet somehow still be somewhat resurrected by some people in the community that ultimately ended up loving the game, with some people thought, hey, you know what, the game wasn't that bad. It was just not what we hoped for at a time where the Saturn really needed a mainline Sonic game to keep it alive. And I know that people would get that with the adventure titles on the Dreamcast, but I'm talking about a bubble period where the Saturn was a console people really wanted to see succeed, and it's a console that I think out of the three had the most potential, but unfortunately that's just something that might have happened in an alternate universe and just not in this one. And in this one, we have a console that ultimately failed but is still worth having a look at, and we have a game that is undercooked, flawed in a lot of departments, and somehow is still worth playing. So yeah, after my very mixed experience with Sonic R, I somehow ended up enjoying it, and well, can't be any worse, right? Right? Anyway, I thought I would do something for this video like I just said at the beginning of the video, and you know, I know it's a bit rusty, very slow, taking my time with things, but I look forward to doing more stuff like this in the future, and I'm going to find ways to improve on this whole off-script method, but I just thought this experiment would be good to try and have a go of. And you know, for anyone that wants to see more of this kind of thing going, please let me know. But whether you don't like it or like it, I'm going to give it a try regardless, because, well, I want to see it as a new challenge in the way how I saw playing through Sonic R and somehow enjoying it was a challenge. Anyway, thank you all for watching. See you soon.
Pepsi Man, it looks like the main computer of Pepsi City went out of control a little while ago from being overloaded. All the roads are affected by the computer and we can't move ahead. There isn't enough Pepsi for everyone, and violence has flared up amongst those wanting Pepsi. Exhausted people are collapsing because they can't refresh themselves with Pepsi. If it continues like this, there will be a worldwide shortage of Pepsi, and we'll have a real problem. Can't you do something to put the computer back in working order?